Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I have been asked recently to comment on what would happen to religion if human beings lived indefinitely. And, of course, I think this is an important question to address because one of the principal elements of any mainstream religion is the proposition that some sort of life, some sort of existence occurs after death, whether it be in a Western monotheistic tradition where there is a heaven or sometimes a hell, or in an Oriental tradition where there could be reincarnation into another life form in this world. So I think one of the reasons why that idea of essentially life after death arose in so many religions, religions that developed practically independently of one another, is that human beings, ever since there was a human species, have been tremendously afraid of death. And rightfully so. It would be the cessation of their own individual existences. So it would be very psychologically comforting for them to find some idea to latch onto that would say that, look, death is not the end of one's own individuality. It would be comforting because it would mean that there would be less to fear about death. And it's interesting because many of these religions have posited afterlives, be it in heaven or as a reincarnated being, that could, at the very least, be much better than one's life in the present world. So if you are a good Christian, you might go to heaven, or according to the Calvinists, if you're one of God's elect, you might go to heaven. If you are a virtuous Hindu, you might get reincarnated into a member of a higher caste with more privileges in your life. And this is intended in part by the advocates of these religions as motivation for virtuous behavior in this world. And this goes to the second role that religion has played throughout most of human history, and that is as a force to maintain certain kinds of behaviors which are considered by those religions to be virtuous. They're not always virtuous by any stretch of the imagination, but in a more cynical light, they can be seen as maintaining the existing social order. The religious framework, which uses tactics that are emotionally appealing to many people, is employed by the ruling elite, whether it be a political class or a class of priests, as existed in many early civilizations, to maintain and support their own power, so that people's ideas of what is virtuous conduct, what is good conduct, hinge on adhering to certain, not just metaphysical beliefs, but certain practices designed to bring them this reward after death. And while they're seeking this reward that will come after death, in this life, they do the bidding of the elites who control the religion. This has been the case for religion for most of human history, but not all. In societies where there's religious freedom, most notably in the United States, which was one of the first to enshrine religious freedom as part of its Constitution, as part of its Bill of Rights in the First Amendment, this tendency for religion to achieve social order diminishes in scope. There's still some of that residual voluntary compliance with religious teachings, but they become much more diverse. There are many more different sects of Christianity in the United States now than existed in continental Europe during the time of the wars of religion in the 1500s and the 1600s. And these literally thousands of religious sects are able to coexist relatively peacefully with one another. Of course, there are occasional flame wars and very unflattering characterizations of one sect by another, some of them deserved, some of them not deserved. But we don't have the massive religious slaughters that existed back during a time in the pre-modern era where a particular set of religious beliefs was seen as the guarantor of social order. And if you deviated from that set of beliefs, if you were a heretic, if you had a different religious viewpoint, even if it's a very slight variation from the predominant one, you could be seen as a threat to the power of the ruling elites. Well, that function of religion has really diminished over time. There are some forces, some religious fundamentalist lobbies that are trying to resurrect that in this country, and it's very alarming. However, it is not nearly as strong as it was circa 1650, either in continental Europe or in the United States and Puritan Massachusetts. So there has been some progress made. So just as we have seen that the role of religion as guarantor of a particular social order and protector of a particular group of entrenched elites has diminished, the other role of religion as a comfort mechanism for people to deal with the eventuality of their own deaths can diminish as well as human life expectancy increases and as death comes to be seen as just a possibility rather than an inevitability. I don't think that any time in the foreseeable future all death would be avoidable altogether. Even if medical technology were able to greatly extend human life, there could still be accidents and natural disasters that could take human lives. I think it would increase humans' awareness of these perils and get humans working much harder than they have been up to now in alleviating them, but still they would exist. Death would still be a possibility. But the mindset that prevails would no longer be, how do I get the best outcome for myself after death, according to the framework of whatever religion I happen to adhere to? Rather, it will be, how can I avoid death? How can I make the best possible life for myself here, in this world? Because death is no longer nearly as scary as it was in the past, in the sense that it can be avoided, rather than it has to be met head on. It has to be experienced by every human being. So, in that sense, I think the allure of religious thinking will diminish. I'm not saying, however, that religion will disappear altogether. If there's one aspect of religions that can be observed to be universally true, is how remarkably adaptable religions are. That is, a religion isn't just a set of ideas that gets passed down from generation to generation unchanging. One expression that I frequently like to use is religions evolve. And I know this flies in the face of what a lot of fundamentalist Christians in the United States think. But if even those people consider their own Christianity as compared to, for instance, the Christianity of St. Augustine or Thomas Aquinas, surely there would be significant doctrinal differences between them and those earlier Christians. So religions evolve. And religions evolve based on factors other than religious doctrine. They evolve based on the societal and economic and cultural environments in which they find themselves. And what can change a societal, economic, or cultural environment more than this lifting of the upper bound on human life expectancy? Surely there would be a tremendous effect on people's worldviews when the technological possibilities will change. Some religions will resist it. Some religions, because their doctrine has become akin to dogma, will wish to stagnate the world in order for their doctrine to remain appealing to their followers. But that's going to be a losing battle. It might, unfortunately, be a battle that delays the advent of needed treatments for a generation or two, which would be extremely tragic. But in the long run, I think, those reactionary forces are going to be defeated. Just as, for instance, in the struggle to abolish slavery, many mainstream religious denominations were against abolition. They were against abolition And they had biblical arguments to back it up. They were saying, well, if slavery is so wrong, then why does the Bible prescribe so many different rules about the treatment of slaves? Clearly, the Bible condones slavery, and I think the Bible actually does condone slavery. But eventually, these religions got dragged by the march of progress, and I think primarily by the influence of the 18th century Enlightenment, into changing their positions on slavery. And sure, there were some radical religious sects that were already out of the mainstream, such as the Quakers and certain other Northern Protestant sects that were abolitionists very early on. But without the secular philosophical influence of the 18th century Enlightenment, as well as the accomplishments of the Industrial Revolution, which had its intellectual roots in the Enlightenment, but which as its consequence had the complete obsolescence of slave labor as a reliable mode of production. Without those influences, slavery might still exist today, and most religious denominations, except those Quakers and other minorities out there, would still endorse it as reasonable. I don't think religion is really an animating force in many eras of human history. Rather, it's a force that kind of lags behind as a barometer of what the culture was a generation ago. And with regard to how that can change, remember that religions are practiced by people too, and they're overseen by people. The hierarchy of priests or pastors or rabbis or imams in a particular religion, all of that is comprised of human beings who live in the world even if they claim not to be of the world. And they see changes in technology, they see changes in economic realities and the economic opportunities that their very followers have. And they have to struggle to stay relevant. And if their theology ceases to be relevant to their followers, they lose attendance, they lose financial backing, and so they have to adapt. With indefinite life extension, the changes will be radical, and likewise the theological adaptations that many religions will have to make will be radical. I'll just give an example. Christianity teaches that there will be a resurrection and a last judgment. What many people don't understand, even many Christians don't understand, that I as an atheist actually do understand, is Christian theology states that the resurrection isn't going to be in some ethereal other world, like a Platonic world of forms. That's actually a corrupted understanding of Christianity that arose out of its blending with Platonism. Rather, the resurrection would be in the flesh. So how is this for a take on Christian theology? What if, in an era of indefinite life extension, when the idea of an afterlife is not going to be nearly as lucrative to as many people, the focus on resurrection in the flesh would be taken a bit more literally, as in figuring out how to essentially reconstruct human beings who have lived before and try somehow to approximate as best as we can their biological makeup and even maybe their memories in the past. A kind of combination of the goal of mind uploading with the goal of indefinite life extension. What if certain branches of Christianity form that start seeing this as the meaning of the resurrection? And what if the meaning of the last judgment would be every person who is resurrected gets called to account for his or her decisions prior to the resurrection? Wouldn't that be an interesting twist on Christianity? Now, of course, with the doctrinal specifics, I don't know exactly how that would be accomplished. I don't know which people would be more receptive to it and which people would resist it, and in which religions and in which sects of which religions it will occur. But it's definitely something that has to occur with any major technological advance in order for the religion to maintain its relevance. They'll try to squirm their way out of it and say that somehow it was really all consistent all along. But they would only be able to do that because of the fickleness of human memory. I have heard certain Christians tell me, literally, that they believe the exact same things that Christians in the early 3rd century believed. Now, they may want to think they believe those exact same things, but maybe that's because they haven't read enough of those early 3rd century Christians to really have an informed opinion about that. But clearly, I would prefer the company of most of today's Christians to the company of most 3rd century Christians any day. Because those people today have absorbed many more valid moral norms than their early Christian predecessors have. The only conclusion that's left to me is that the source of those moral norms is not Christianity, it's something else, something that has happened in between the 3rd century and today. I happen to think it's the 18th century Enlightenment and its philosophical successor movements. So with that being said, the future of religion is clearly in the hands of individual human beings. And people ultimately have the choice to look at reality in a certain way or to look at it in a different way. What they focus on will affect what their beliefs turn out to be. And I'm not saying necessarily that people can will themselves to believe absolutely anything or everything, though the Jesuits in the 16th century would have you believe that that is possible. What I'm saying is, by looking at particular aspects of reality to a greater extent than at others, one's conclusions and one's beliefs are shaped. Indefinite human life extension is going to introduce a very prominent other aspect of reality that people haven't looked at very much yet, and that's definitely going to affect their convictions, including their religious views. I think fewer people will be religious. The ones that are really going to have to change how they define their worldviews and their theologies and their systems of religious belief.